name's Angela Sweeney, and I tweet under the name @AngelaSweeney, so it's really easy to figure out who I am. I am going to be talking today about how you can use social media in your PR outreach efforts, both in terms of sharing your message and also in terms of cultivating relationships with your local journalists and local media. We're going to talk a little bit about what media relations is, how you can use social media to develop your media lists, and also how you can engage engage the media via the social media channels that you choose to employ, whether it's you as an individual, whether it's you as a shopping center, or whether it's you as a corporation. There are various tactics that you can use that apply to all three of those. So let's talk a little bit about media relations, just to kind of give you a quick overview. Media relations is really how you manage the relationship between you and your local journalist and your local media. It's how you interact with them that really kind of sets the tone for your engagement levels with them and their willingness to listen to stories that you have to talk about, and their willingness to kind of view you as a trusted news source for various stories that they might be working on. But it is a really important tool, and it's one of the things that I've noticed about social media. I kind of fell into this, but you know, most of your journalists nowadays are online. Most of your journalists are on Twitter. A lot of them tweet about stories that they're writing about. You can't, is that better? Okay, sorry. If I start doing that again, warn me. They're all online, and they're all using Twitter in various different ways, and it's a great way to get to know your local media. We'll talk a little bit about media list development. You know, again, you all have local publications in your local market, and then there are obviously industry publications that we all know and love and follow. And if you follow them, you'll start to see that they have really started to embrace various different social media channels. Like Globe Street is now on, you know, Facebook and Twitter and very active. BizNow is now really active on Twitter. You know, so there's a lot of media outlets that are tweeting, and there are a lot of reporters that work for those media outlets that are tweeting individually as well as on behalf of their media outlets. So there's a great, you know, resource on Twitter to be able to find and reach out to a lot of these different media folks. There are various different user groups and list functions. There's a couple of public relations companies in the Baltimore market, in the Baltimore, DC area, that have actually put together a list of Baltimore media, and you can follow through the list functionality on Twitter and see who all of those media are and what they're writing about, what they're talking about, and you know, it helps you identify who the appropriate resources are and who the appropriate reporters are for each of the stories that you might be interested in trying to get placed. One of the things that's really important when you do use Twitter and Facebook and some of these other social media tools is make sure they know who you are. When you follow them, make sure your bio is complete. Make sure that you're telling them who you are, what you do, and why it would be good for them to actually follow you. If you look at the bio that I have up here, I list my name, my title, and the company that I work for, and the industry that I tend to tweet and post about the most. And it helps them to understand, you know, what kind of stories it would make sense to reach out to me about, what kind of things that I'm talking about, what kind of expertise I can be a resource for them about, and it just kind of helps facilitate the engagement. So, specific to Twitter, once you've kind of identified who some of the reporters are that you'd like to develop a relationship with and you find them on Twitter, follow them, and again, let them know who you are. You know, send them a message, tell them you like the tweets, or if they wrote a story that you happen to be quoted in, or if they wrote a story about something that is a topic that you're familiar with, shoot them a note. Use the reply functionality in Twitter and start a conversation. Retweet or reply to stories that they write that are of interest to you, because it also, again, kind of raises their level of awareness of who you are and what you do, and you know, what topics you can be a resource to them for. Make it easy. Don't make them, you know, work for it. Help them understand exactly, you know, what you bring to the table and why you are a good resource. Facebook. How many of you guys, all of you on Facebook? Most of you on Facebook? There are some great resources on Facebook in terms of developing relationships with journalists. Start with your local news, weather, traffic, you know, magazines. There's all sorts of publications in your local area. If you are a national developer with a national footprint, obviously you want to, you know, follow the trade magazines. As I mentioned earlier, Globe Street has a great presence. ICSC has a great presence. Retail traffic as well. So find those on Facebook that appeal to your particular industry and follow them. Comment on posts that you think are relevant and engage. I mean, that's the whole thing about social media, is you really want to make it a two-way conversation. It's not just about you talking to reporters, it's about creating a dialogue between you and the reporter. Don't stalk them. You know, for some individual reporters, Facebook is personal, and I think you need to learn how to respect boundaries in the various different social media channels. But you know, you can certainly engage with a brand or a media outlet. Be a little bit more judicious in terms of the actual individual reporters that you reach out and seek. There are some other channels like Twitter, like LinkedIn, that are a little bit better in terms of that one-on-one dialogue with reporters than I think Facebook is. There is one great resource here, and you see the image of it right there. It's called Journalists on Facebook. It is a great tool that Facebook kind of put out there, and it's a great way to see what journalists are writing about. It crosses industries. It's not specific to shopping centers, but it's a great way to see what reporters are thinking, how they operate. It's kind of a glimpse into the journalistic world on Facebook, and it's actually kind of interesting to follow. They'll do profiles on various different reporters, and there's some pretty good information when you follow that on Facebook. If you do engage with reporters, make sure that you follow up. You know, they're always on deadline, and especially nowadays in a 24-hour news cycle, there is always a deadline. And if you are going to be a useful resource to them, you need to make sure that if they call you, if they reach out to you, if they tweet you, if they direct message you, whatever way that they choose to reach out to you, make sure that you follow up quickly, because it's really important to help them meet their deadlines and get them the information that they need. And, you know, sometimes you're not going to have an answer. Sometimes you may not be able to give an answer. But one of the things that's really helpful is to just respond. You know, even if the response is, I'm sorry, I can't help you with that particular story, or I'm sorry, I can't, you know, respond to that particular question, at least you're responding and letting them know that you've heard them and that you've been aware of their question and are trying to be helpful. Here are some of the resources that I follow and I think could be very helpful for you all to follow. Shopping Center Today has a great Twitter feed. ICSC, obviously, Globe Street is now, SREB is Southeast Real Estate Business. It's a great tool, you know, and covers a lot of the business news in the Southeast. Retail Traffic, obviously, is a great publication that covers our space. Put ICSC up there again. I can't emphasize enough. If you're on Twitter, if you're active, if you've got stories to share, ICSC is a great way to go about doing that. Wall Street Journal Real Estate is another great publication that is active online on Twitter as well as on Facebook, so definitely one to check out. National Retail Federation, for those of you who are retailers out there, the National Retail Federation is very active on Twitter, and it's a great resource to kind of keep up with what's going on in the retail space, what's going on with your retailers, what's going on with retail sales, you know, how you can work with your retailers, you know, and how you can spread the news about what's going on in their space through your various different channels. So that's a great resource as well. And then for those of you who are familiar with CoStar, CoStar does a lot of news and distributes a lot of information via their online channels, and definitely something that's worth checking out and getting to know. Wow, I flew through those slides. I think I'm still racing because I ran over here from the far end of the South Hall, and I don't think the pace has slowed down since I got here. A couple of other just general thoughts. I run marketing and communications for the Peterson Companies, which is a real estate development company based in Fairfax, Virginia. So we have a pretty sizable footprint in and around the DC metro area. I started the communications role there about a year ago, and was really blown away at how many relationships I was able to develop in a very short period of time with media outlets, particularly on Twitter. It has just been a great tool for me, and a lot of it was, quite honestly, trial and error. I mean, I would reach out to certain reporters, I would comment on stories, I would, note if I was at a function. A lot of you go to a lot of the different real estate meetings that occur in your various different cities, and you would notice the reporters that were there covering it. I would follow it on Twitter, and you would see a local reporter writing about something, and I would reach out to them and say, hey, I'm here too, I'd like to say hello and meet you. And it worked really well, and so I was able to meet a lot of real estate journalists who cover that area in the DC Metro. And then social media is another topic. We go to a lot of social media presentations, and following who's tweeting about, following the hashtags. Does everybody know what the hashtags are? Following hashtags is a great way to find out who's talking about various different topics and engaging them on those topics. And it just kind of expands your network. It allows you to meet, a lot of new people that you might not have otherwise met. You might not have even known that reporter was in the room in the days before Twitter, and now that they're tweeting about what they're hearing, it's a great way to find out who they are. Quick anecdotal story. I was at the Mid-Atlantic ICSC conference earlier this year. It was at the Gaylord National in National Harbor, which is one of our properties. And one of the executive vice presidents from Tanger Outlets was presenting on the project that they JV'd with us to build at National Harbor. And so he was talking about the project and talking about how many stores it was going to have and stuff that we had talked publicly about before. But there was a reporter in the audience, and as I'm scrolling through the Twitter feed, she's actually live tweeting and put a blog post together that by the time he was off stage was online on the Washington Business Journal. So it is fast-paced, it is happening all around you, and it is happening instantaneously, and you have to be in tune to it, particularly if you've got a story that you're managing or a story that you're working on. Those kinds of conferences, they're all there and they're writing about it, and it's a great opportunity for you to jump in and be a part of the conversation. So I think probably what I'll do now is just kind of turn it over to Q&A. If you guys have specific questions or have anything. Yes.
Hello everyone. I have over 70,000 followers on Twitter. Sometime from 70,000 it dropped down to 58 or 90,000. How can I keep all of my followers following me constantly and keep staying up and up and up?
I think one of the best tips with Twitter, and I started from 0, and I think I'm hovering around 815 right now, and it took me 18 months to get there, and it continues to grow. I think what's happening now with Twitter and with a lot of the social networks, for a while it was, how many followers can I possibly rack up? It was like this contest to have the most followers. And now what you're finding is that it's more important to have an engagement with these folks. It's not a numbers game anymore. It's about meaningful relationships, meaningful dialogue. It's about really providing content that people who follow you find interesting and relevant. And what I have found is by steadily focusing in on commercial real estate, and marketing communications, which is the majority of what I tweet about, I've seen my numbers steadily grow.
What I do, I'm a VIP host for all Las Vegas nightclubs, and I have lots of celebrities that I host with an agent, and every time I host, I take a picture of them, I post it on Twitter, and I got a hit. My Twitter's linked into my Facebook, linked into my LinkedIn. I got a hit anyway. Is there any way can you be our host, or is there any way you can reserve our VIP table at that club of which celebrity is going to be? You want to be next to it. Yeah, the number increased. 3 days later, dropped down 15 and I lost. And I want to keep the number going higher and higher. And it's hard for me, and I don't understand how that works. Or I do something wrong when I post it.
I'm not that familiar with your Twitter feed, although I noticed that you recently followed me, so it was great. Yes, you did.
Okay.
So and it was like right before the conference, and I thought, wow, some nightclub in Vegas is following me. But it was a result of a tweet that I had posted about coming out to Las Vegas for Recon. And, people tend to follow you, and then they, once they get a feel for what your feed is, if it's useful information to you, they'll stick with you. If it's not useful information, they'll drop you. I used to get really upset. I used to use this service called Twitter Quitters. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but there's this service called Twitter Quitter. And I would get really upset if somebody stopped following me. I thought, well, what did I do wrong? Like, what happened? Yeah. And then I just learned over time that it's just the nature of the beast. People follow you, they stop following you. Some people have started following me again after they've dropped me. It's just, it's whether your content is meaningful to them in the moment that they make that decision.
Nothing wrong that you do or I do. It's just
not necessarily.
It's just no more fun for them. There's no interest.
Yeah.
Correct? Yeah. Because I have celebrity for sale. What I do wrong.
Yeah.
So I want to increase it more instead of decrease.
Any other questions about Twitter? Sure.
About the media.
Okay.
Real estate development company, a publication had been hounding me about doing an article, and finally got around to doing the article. They called me back about 2 days later, telling me what the next step was going to be, which was they were going to send me a draft of proof, but then they also wanted a list of our vendors and clients, and so the alarm went off. How do you deal with that?
Well, I actually was in a similar situation, and I am not a big fan of going after articles in that way. I think there are enough newsworthy publications out there that you can get their message, that you can get your message out in without necessarily having to give up your vendor list. So as a general rule, if it's a publication that I'm not familiar with, I will reach out to them and kind of ask to see the publications so that I can understand, what their format is, how their articles typically tend to look. And a lot of times you can kind of see the pattern, where they, have the article and then it's surrounded by vendor copy. There are some people who love that format, and there are some people who are perfectly comfortable in doing that. It really is just a personal preference on your part. But if you're not comfortable with it, I've said no. I've said, no, I'm sorry, that's not something that we're comfortable with, and we're happy to talk to you, and if you want to write a story, great, but in our particular case, we didn't give up the list. Any other questions? Is there any media in the audience here? Just curious? Okay. It'd be interesting to get their perspective. If any of you are in the Mid-Atlantic area, we are actually working on putting together a conference with some local journalists who are active on various social media outlets and doing it through ICSC, so stay tuned for information on that, but that would be an interesting topic.
Thank you. Angela, great presentation.
Thank you.
How do you, in this day and age, we're always getting question on return, and how do you measure the effectiveness and all that good stuff? Is there any kind of ROI tools that you can maybe share that you use? We talked about conversation, which, we all get. But I think, from a senior management perspective, we're always getting asked about return. So is there anything you can share?
Sure. Well, I think strictly from a public relations perspective, one of the best returns that you can get is if you actually cultivate a relationship online into an article that's placed, that highlights a story or a message that you're trying to get across. But in general, there was a social media session this morning through the Recon Academy, and we talked a little bit about ROI and some of the new tools that are out there. When we first started in this business, there weren't a lot of metrics. But there now are a couple of really great things, like Facebook Insights is an incredible tool if you're on Facebook to really measure, are people engaging with you? Are you finding new followers? Are they sharing your stories? And it gives you some great insights into what posts resonate most with your shoppers and how do you continue to provide those kind of posts, which will continue to feed the engagement levels. So Facebook Insights is a great tool that helps you sort of measure some of that. LinkedIn too. Even some of the corporate posts that we put on LinkedIn regarding a new lease that's signed or a new deal that we're working on, you can really see who's sharing your stories, what kind of levels of engagement, what the interactions are. So the social media channels themselves are starting to get a little bit more savvy in terms of helping you measure and put some metrics around what it is that you're trying to accomplish. The other resource that I'll throw out there is Center Social, and if you guys are familiar with Alexander Babbage, they're a research company that does a lot of research in the shopping center industry. They actually started benchmarking social media about 2 years ago, and what they do every quarter is they look at what's going on across the developers, what's going on across individual shopping centers, what are the trends in fan growth and follower growth, and they actually benchmark the top 20 shopping centers, they benchmark the top 20 developers who are active on social media, and they've recently added Foursquare to the mix, and they've done some insights in terms of which outlet ties to the types of messaging that those followers of those outlets like to hear. So for some, like Twitter is more promotional, they want to know what's going on, what events are happening, and it tends to skew, a little bit more male than female. Foursquare tends to skew a little bit more male, so the types of offers that you offer, need to be reflective of that demographic base. So those kinds of resources are great just to help you hone in your message and figure out what you want to say to the various different audiences on the various different channels. I'm sorry? Google Plus. I'm on Google Plus. Google Plus was one of those things that kind of came out of nowhere and exploded, and all of a sudden you've got huge circles of friends. It skews heavier male than it does female. I kind of scan it every once in a while to keep track of the news, and I know that there are some folks who are very, very active on it. It's not one that I personally am very active on. I tend to focus more on Twitter and LinkedIn, but it's definitely a great resource for those who find it beneficial.